Future-Proof is sponsored by Concordia Dental Healthcare, expert care you can trust.
Thank you for staying with me. You're watching Future-Proof, the business television programme that looks at the merits of emotional intelligence to help us future-proof moving forward. You're watching Sarah Hopwood, in the first half I was talking about different elements of emotional intelligence, only literally just on the surface. There's much more to come as these programmes continue. This is now our second series, and I was also just going into the break talking about listening skills and active listening, and running through some of the questions on the electronic diagnostic that I have about listening skills. So the first two questions I was talking about looking directly at the person. Don't worry if you can't do that, but try and maybe find something on the hairline or an ear or a nose or something, so at least the person thinks that you're looking at them. Because I do understand particularly introverts can at times find direct eye contact, certainly if it's sustained, they can find it quite challenging. Repeating back to people what you've heard to make sure that you've got your understanding right, that's a massive part of active listening. And it's not just repeating it back, but you know that you've been heard when somebody actually uses your words, the words that you are using, because it shows also empathy and understanding that they do understand what your words mean. But also when you're repeating back, you can do it as a statement, but it's quite good to actually do it as a question. You know, have I understood you correctly? Is this exactly what you meant, or have I got it slightly wrong? So that you give the person an opportunity to adjust or to correct or maybe use another word. And somebody did it to me the other day. It was quite interesting because, you know, I've done this a lot with clients, and it's lovely when someone does it to you. And when they repeated back, they actually said, can I just check that I've understood you properly? And they then used the word responsibility in some of that. And so when I listened to the repeat back, I then paused, so I suspended, and I then said yes. And I said, and the key word that you've heard is responsibility. There was something that I was feeling responsible for, and they were coming back to say, actually, you're not responsible for that, so don't worry. And I was able to, and that was the nail on the head. The key word was responsibility. So when you're speaking, if you only had to pick one word, what would that be? Or if you're listening, what are the key words that you might be listening for when somebody is speaking to you? Put aside your prejudices, biases and agendas, and listen with an open mind to what is being said. Again, all of these, I could say every single one is a huge part of emotional intelligence. And here, the word out of the whole of that sentence there is the word bias, and something called unconscious bias. We all as human beings show unconscious bias depending on our life's experience, depending on things that have influenced us. And you know, I remember being tested once, and in fact, there were students, and they were asked to draw pictures of a reggae band, draw pictures of a pilot, draw pictures of a nurse, draw pictures of a police person, draw pictures of a whatever it is. And it was amazing. These kids, you know, for example, the pilot, I think every single one of them drew a man. And then they had the professionals walk in the room, and of course the pilot was a female, and other things too. And you just saw these children, their jaws just dropped open because their belief systems have been challenged. Because to begin with, they were going, pilot, that can't be. Of course it can be. And they countered, if you like, their reasoning halfway through, if you like, their internal sentencing. Summing up, either towards the middle or to the end of the conversation what you have just heard. That's a very, very useful part of showing active listening. Some would say actually listen to the end, but it does depend. Some people can talk for a very, very long time. So I have to say I'm guilty of interrupting at times to sum up, just to double check that. And sometimes it's actually a time efficient thing. You know, if I'm going to listen to you for 20 minutes, maybe after about 10 I ought to do some summing up to check that I'm not going to get this completely wrong by the time we reach 20 minutes. Experiencing with the other person what they think and feel. This is can be quite difficult, particularly around the feeling. If you don't know, then you don't know. And this is very obvious in bereavement. If somebody has never ever lost anybody and know anything of that pain, they can understand to a level, but they have no real understanding of what happens in the grieving process. And that's why, and I've heard counsellors and I've heard people talk and actually teach on grieving, that it's something you have to be very careful about saying to somebody of, I know how you feel, because they can very, very quickly think and want to say to you, you do not have a clue how I feel, because you don't know. So that's quite important, putting aside what you are doing and turning towards the other person to face them. Now, how many times, I must say that again, how many times have we had that where people have been on a mobile, or indeed they're talking and interacting with you, but they're holding a phone? And there's a great, is it Senate, great video about people who walk and have conversations with other people, but they're holding a mobile phone. And he said the unspoken messaging is, this is far more important than what you're saying to me. So we have to be very, very careful about making sure that we stop what we are doing and listen to somebody. I'll never forget when our son Daniel was quite young. He was at nursery, and every few days or so, the nursery were telling me that for no reason Daniel was just dropping to the ground. And it wasn't happening at home, and so I went to the doctor and they said there's nothing. They had a look, they checked all his reflexes, and then I went to the doctor again because it didn't stop. The nursery kept telling me that every now and again, for no reason, he was just dropping to the ground. And eventually I went in and I saw the doctor, and I'm not knocking doctors, they're very good, I'm not knocking them, but I just remember feeling that I didn't have the full attention of the GP when I went in for the third time. And I didn't know how to get his attention. He was busy, he was half writing, he was going, yep, what's the matter, yep, it was all that kind of stuff. So in the end, and this is tied up with this, putting aside what you are doing and turning to the other person to face them. So I remember in the end I sat there silently. So eventually he just became aware of the silence, and then my opening statement, I just sat there and I said, as a parent, I am very, 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 very worried about my son. And then I just left it silent. And so he, in some ways, had no alternative but to put his pen down and say, what's the matter? Because it was obvious from what I was doing that I had no intention of speaking until I had his full attention. And with that, I then told him in detail what was going on, and I could immediately tell. And each doctor I was seeing, they were different, so I'm not knocking one person. I could immediately tell that he was listening and understanding what I was saying, and that we were able to then put together a plan, an investigation. Daniel was so young that obviously no one wanted kind of all the heavy stuff, but it was well looked into. And in fact, what we could only assume, because of the changes that we did, was that there was some nervousness that he had. He wasn't happy for whatever reason, and it was possibly a stress response to something that was going on. And I'm not suggesting that he was being beaten up there, but certainly emotionally there was something that obviously he was struggling with, which was causing him intense stress, which is why he was dropping to the ground. But I don't know, there may be more research now that maybe it's just called the drop syndrome or something, I don't know, but he grew out of it anyway, it was fine, whatever it was. Understanding a frame or reference and perspective different from your own. This is, if you can think of like a picture frame, and if we all, I don't know, went to the cinema, we're all sat in different picture frames, seeing things from a different point of view. Police will tell you this from a scene of a crime or an incident, that what they are doing when they do investigations afterwards is they are gathering different people's picture frames, because they know that we all see things very, very differently. When we are actively listening, what this is a challenge to do is to almost get out of our picture frame and to go and sit in the other person's picture frame. So again, it's tied up with empathy, it's tied up with walking in somebody's shoes, go along that journey with them for a while and sit, if you like, in their picture frame and to get out of our own. And the last one, feeding back to the person the essence of what he or she has said, but in a restated form. So that's in again in a kind of repeat of what we've already talked about, but in a restated form, so you're saying it back in a different way. But when you can hear that the person repeating back to you is using words that you've used, or if you're the listener, you're using words that the person has used, then whilst you might be putting it in slightly different sentences, so you're not literally verbatim repeating back, mimicking if you like, but if you're using keywords, you are clearly demonstrating that you are listening, and good for you for doing that. Have a great week.